Okay, about to start. All right. The title, tonight's title is a little bit over the top, I guess, but you'll see why. In God's mind, or in the mind of God. As some of you probably know, or maybe everybody knows, we're coming up to the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov. The birthday of the Baal Shem Tov is this Monday. And it's also the birthday of the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. Both of them share the same birthday, so it's a pretty important day coming up. Sorry, 1 second. I'm in the middle of a class. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. So the Monday will be Chai Elul, the 18th day of Elul, which is a pretty important day in the Hasidic calendar, and specifically in the Jewish calendar in general. And I will actually be I will be at the Ohel. The Ohel means the burial site, the burial place of the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. They're buried right next to each other, and I'll be there on Monday. So if anyone has any special requests that you want me to put in at the gravesite, please send them to me by email, and I will do what I can to get them in there. Okay, so the concept that I wanted to talk about tonight was actually based on a very, very fundamental teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, and one that is essentially, you could say it's a gateway to the entire way of thinking of the Baal Shem Tov, and why it was so revolutionary in its time, and why it is still so revolutionary today. And it's this. We're going to talk about the concept of what's called Hashgacha Pratis, or divine providence. And the Baal Shem Tov's take on it in particular. Now, one of the the concept of divine providence is obviously a universal concept in Jewish thought. It's just how you think about it and how you understand it is the question. So, what did the Baal Shem Tov explain? For many other sages that preceded the Baal Shem Tov, it seems that they understood divine providence as individual divine providence only for human beings. Only human beings were privy to individual divine providence, but all the rest of creation only had a sort of a general providence. In other words, not a providence on the individual, but a providence as far as the species is concerned. In other words, a certain type of tree or a certain type of animal and so on, but not any particular individual animal. And the Baal Shem Tov, or tree or plant or whatever may happen to be in the Baal Shem Tov, turned that theory a little bit on its head, and he explained that there's individual divine providence for everything, even for inanimate objects, even for something regarded as inanimate. One of the proofs that he brings for this is actually from the Talmud itself. There's a discussion in the Talmud in a Masechta called Chulin, the tractate called Chulin, which I think it's on page 63A or B. Don't remember, but the Talmud talks about a statement of one of the sages. One of the sages once saw a stork fishing out a fish from the sea. It swooped down and picked up this fish from the sea, and he commented quoting the verse in Psalms, Mishpatecha Tahom Rabba, your judgments extend to the depths of the ocean. Your judgments extend to the depths of the ocean, which means quite simply that this particular fish, its time had come to provide lunch for that particular stork. So we see that even a stork and a fish, there's a specific judgment for that individual fish and that individual stork, that should be the incident that happened at that particular time. And one of the sages, Sage Rabbi Yochanan, expressed this, which means that there is a thread, even though it was not a developed thread, but there's a thread of understanding very similar to the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov goes further than this, but we'll see there's a thread very similar to the thread of the Baal Shem Tov, to the understanding of the Baal Shem Tov, that there is, sorry, my phone is making noises. I'm just going to switch off the noise. Okay. That there is a judgment even on, in other words, there is Hashgacha Pratis, there is individual divine providence for this fish and this stork. So that sort of proves the Baal Shem Tov's point. It goes a little bit further, actually, we could say, that the difference between a stork or any other bird and a fish is that fish is to a certain extent considered, it's not literally considered inanimate matter, but it is considered a far less sentient being than a bird, for example. A bird is sentient, it has feeling, it has a certain level of consciousness, but fish have much less so. One of the reasons being because they are buried within their source. They're sort of always in the sea, and they don't see beyond that. They're in the realm which is called the realm of Sovev Ko'omin, which is the enveloping light of divinity rather than the specific individual light. So therefore they have a little bit of a different destiny in a sense, to the extent that fish do not have to be slaughtered like animals and birds do, kosher animals and birds. Before eating them, they have to be slaughtered, ritually slaughtered in the proper way, in order for them to be kosher and to be allowed to be eaten. But fish do not. So they're slightly different. They have a slightly different life form than birds. So even a lower life form, in a certain sense, a lower life form, also has the same kind of situation, the same kind of rule to a certain extent as, just one second here, as inanimate matter to a certain extent, in any event. So that first rule is, that first concept in the Baal Shem Tov's teaching is that for everything there is individual divine providence, to the extent that if a stone falls from a mountain, that is also by individual divine providence for that particular stone at that particular time. Okay. There's a second step. And the second step is, not only is there individual divine providence on every movement of every creature, whether even an inanimate creature, in other words, even something like a stone or a plant or an animal, and for sure a human being, but every movement of every object and every place of every object has its part in the how can you call it, the general intention of the creation, of the entire creation, the general intention for the entire creation. In other words, there's nothing that exists in reality that isn't there for some purpose. There's nothing random anywhere in the universe, according to the teaching, the Baal Shem Tov. There's nothing random. Everything has its place. Everything has its meaning. Everything has its intention. Everything has its purpose. That's the second concept in. Someone doesn't have audio. Sorry about that. Oh, it's good. Okay, fine. So Yal asks, the fish has more divine life force than a bird. In a way of makif, in a way of enveloping, but not in a way of light invested within it. Light invested within it is more within in a bird than within a fish. And I'm just making this. It's a slight distinction. I don't think we need to get into it too. A roof leaking at a certain time versus in random time. Yeah, exactly. In other words, there is a definite and clear, not necessarily clear to us, but certainly clear to the Almighty, clear to God, like what the purpose of this particular thing is, why it is where it is, and why this is happening to this particular thing at this point in time. Now, there are very great souls that can fathom these things as well. The Baal Shem Tov was obviously one of them. He was able to understand what it is that this particular thing is here for now. And therefore, he was able to, he had the power to be able to change the destiny of certain things because he could repurpose, you could say, he could repurpose the energy of that particular configuration of energy to be repurposed or retooled in a different way for a different purpose. The example that he teaches is based on the verse I've mentioned it many times before, but based on the verse in the section that tells the story of Noah's Ark. When God tells Noah to make an ark, he says, "Tzohar ta'aseh l'teva," make for yourself a window, make a window in the ark. Now, that window is explained as either a window or a source of light, because actually it was dark for an extended period of time, 100 days. It was dark during the time of the flood, and there was the luminaries in the sky weren't even seen, so it was almost completely dark. And it wouldn't have really helped to have a window. So some commentaries say, no, it wasn't a window, it was a source of light. In any event, the word for a source of light in the verse is the word tzara. I'm sorry, not tzara, tzohar, right? The word tzohar. In English, I don't have my pad connected, which is a mistake. I had to disconnect it because it was downloading something and it was interfering. Okay, so I didn't do that. But the word tzohar means a window or a source of light. But it's also the same letters as the word tzara. Tzara means trouble, right? Means trouble, a time of trouble, a time of anguish, a time of suffering, a time of problems, and so on and so forth. As the verse says, Et tzarahi leYaakov. It's a time of trouble for Jacob. Jacob is is one of the terms used for the Jewish people. Umimena yivashea, and from it he will be rescued. So the usual explanation is from it he will be rescued, meaning he'll be rescued from the trouble. The Baal Shem Tov explains it differently. He says, no, the word from it he will be rescued, Jacob will be rescued, means that the trouble itself will become the rescue. From it, the salvation will come. In other words, from the trouble itself, from the problem, from the anguish, from the suffering itself, the salvation will come. Doesn't mean to say that when you accept your suffering with equanimity or whatever, that's necessarily the solution. The solution is to change the tzara into tzohar, to change the suffering into a source of light. Now, there's various in-between steps how we go about that, but that's not really the subject for tonight. If anyone's really interested, and I can go into it further. But all right, let me just mention it while we're about it. The word Sarah and the word Tzohar are two permutations of the three letters Tzadik Hey Resh in Hebrew. But there are other permutations as well. Another one is Haratz. Haratz. Haratz means someone who runs. Haratz, the person who runs. So the Baal Shem Tov says like this, and it's also the permutation of another word, which is rotzeh. If you spell it like that, rotzeh. So a person that runs to do what it is that God wants of him, a person who does, in other words, God's will with alacrity, can turn tzara, anguish and suffering, into tzohar. He has to see that the anguish and suffering itself is the source of light. And then he runs to do God's will. In other words, he runs to accept that the situation was given to him to transform the darkness into light, the trouble into a source of light. Okay, so that's what that's another teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, and he explains, therefore, that everything that there is in creation, it doesn't matter what it is, has its purpose. Even anguish and suffering has its purpose within creation, either as a means of purification. There's a couple of questions in the chat. Even as a means of purification, or for some other reason, to strengthen a person, or to remove some kind of blemish in their soul, purification, and so on and so forth. So Ernest is asking, one second, there's a few questions that I missed. I'll explain why it's not like magic. I'll explain that in a minute. Okay. All evidence, Ernest, is all evidence of Providence intended to provide work for us. Do the lofty souls seek work due to them understanding it on a higher level and thereby having a lack of work? I'm not sure that leads to a lack of work in any sense. There's always much more to be done than there's time to do it or strength to do it. Yes, it's the concept of elevating everything, good or bad. Everything comes for the good, yes. So to go back to your question, Ernest, yes, it provides us with, I wouldn't say work so much as a mission. I would say that the word mission is a better word than the word work. It provides us with a sense of purpose. Since God has a purpose for everything in the world, when whatever it is that happens to me happens, I have to discover the purpose thereof, or I have to guide it towards the purpose that it must be there for, even if I don't understand what the purpose is, but I greet it with alacrity and with a positive attitude that changes the darkness into light, so to speak, is that I can understand that within the tzara, within the anguish, within the suffering is a spark of goodness. That suffering is there for a positive purpose. And as long as I treat it that there's a positive energy within it, a positive purpose, a spark of godliness within it, that spark of godliness is going to be released sooner or later. Okay. So, therefore, the Baal Shem Tov says that everything is part of the intention, or the entire intention in creation. In other words, everything is running according to plan in God's mind. Let's put it that way. We could give an example of it from someone who, let's say, runs a business very efficiently, or the example that the Rebbe gives in his discourse on this is from what's called in Yiddish a balabosta. A balabosta means someone who runs a tight ship at home. In other words, a lady, the mother of the house, who runs a tight ship with her with her scheduling, and with making sure that everything's there on time, the kids should go to bed on time, they should eat on time, and so on and so on, all these kinds of things. And she has everything that she needs in the house and nothing that she doesn't need. Now, I know that in America this is not this is not in vogue. It's not the fashion in America to have things in your house that only that which you need. The vogue in America is to have many things which you don't need and you probably are never going to use. And yes, for some reason or another, you think that you might want them at some point in time, and therefore you're reluctant to throw them out. I know how it works because I've I've lived through such circumstances. Yeah. Okay. So that's that's sort of an example of someone who runs a tight ship. You have everything you need, and how much more so, obviously, does apply to the Almighty, does apply to God. He has everything he needs in his world, and it doesn't have anything that he doesn't need. How much more so, obviously, that he runs a tight ship, and therefore everything in this world that exists, everything that there is, every event that happens is part of some divine plan. Whether we know the plan or we don't know the plan, that is the reality that if we accept that reality, then we will find that things are moving in a much more positive direction. Let's put it that way. Now, does that mean that the level of divine providence that there is for every creature is revealed to the same extent? And the answer is no. It does not mean that. It is actually only revealed divine providence for those who are on a higher level. It's not always revealed to those people who are on a lower level of spiritual development or a lower level of spiritual service. Let's put it that way. An animal won't see its, won't understand. Obviously, in human terms, won't understand divine providence, but human beings can, if they meditate on it and contemplate. You'll see that there's many things that happen in your life in the past that have brought you to the point that you are, and have changed things tremendously. For example, I was just reading a story the other day about a person, I don't even remember his name, but he was a drug addict and a drug peddler. And he just had his sentence commuted, or he had his sentence commuted, and he was let free of prison recently. What he was doing, even when he was in prison, he reformed himself. He realized that his situation was terrible, and he reformed himself. He got off his addiction, and he started to help people that, even while he was in prison, that he knew, fellow prisoners that he knew were suffering from the same addiction that he was, and addiction to drugs. And he turned himself around completely, and he now actually heads a fairly large organization of people that an organization that helps people to deal with these issues. Now, how did he get there? He got there because of criminal activity, selling drugs. He was in prison for a long time, but he turned his life around. And this is the kind of thing that a person who apparently was not a very well-educated person. He had a fairly, I think he had an elementary education, and that's about it. He dropped out of school in high school, early in high school, and I don't think he had much of an education, but he certainly turned his life around completely, to the extent that he's a very well-known figure. I forget his name now, but he's a well-known figure in those circles that deal with alcoholism, drug addiction, and all kinds of other addictions. In any event, like the story of the Baal Shem Tov, his students as a house guest, the greedy man and the kind farmer. I'm not sure that I know that story, Ben. Maybe you could share it with me, or and I'll tell it another time. So Ernest is asking, can an animal, plant, rock sense joy related to providence? And if so, do we humans have an influence over them relating to the sense of joy in our creator? I would say that that's definitely true in terms of plants, animals for sure, just talk to your cat or your dog or whatever it is, and you'll see they're wagging their tail and this and then the other. Or, for a dog, cats don't wag their tails, but yes, definitely. Will a a rock feel that that sense of joy? I don't know, but don't forget the story in the Torah that Moses was supposed to speak to the rock, right? He wasn't supposed to hit it, he was supposed to speak to it. In other words, he was supposed to communicate with the rock in terms of the whole purpose of that rock and so on. So there must be some possibility of communication in that way, and we see that with great tzaddik, with great saintly people. Things happen, even in the inanimate world. Things happen that turn out to be, let's call it felicitous, good results from communicating. Splitting the sea is another example. When the sea split, at the behest of Moses, telling the sea it's it's time to part ways, so to speak. Right, and that's exactly true. Joseph being taken down to Egypt, he saw it as a whole different thing. He was there kind of on a mission, and he took his job seriously, and to the extent that he became the viceroy in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. Yeah, so there's different levels, therefore, of divine providence. In other words, there's divine providence which is only visible to very, very great souls. And most of us see certain events as being divine providence, but we don't really notice a lot of what goes on around us. But much of that has to do with individual choices that we make. The more a person is aligned with divinity, the more divine providence sort of seems to things seem to fall into place much more easily for those kinds of people. Even in the finer details of events that happen. In other words, to be at the right time at the right place, to be or for others to be at the right time, the right place, just for your for your education, for your edification, for your enlightenment, and so on, or for you to be in a certain place, to be able to help somebody out, or to be able to instruct somebody, enlighten somebody, and so on and so forth, is part of that whole picture. So what we're saying, therefore, is that because everything is part of the divine plan, therefore, there must be divine providence for every object in the universe, for everything, for every event, for every object in the universe, and for things to coincide and sort of two events to happen at the same time, or a person to be in a certain place at a certain time, has to be seen as as part of that divine plan. And therefore, rocks bring you joy. I always collect one at every highlight in my life. I can tell you where each one came from. That's an interesting thing. Huh. I never thought about that. Yeah. Rocks as markers. I mean, it used to be, that rocks would mark. People would use rocks to sort of mark events and to mark places and to mark. Yeah. So I hear it's an interesting idea. So we could see, therefore, that the interaction of a human being, especially one who thinks about things, with the world can lead them to understand much more about what goes on in the divine mind than someone who is completely oblivious to these things. Now, there's one thing that one has to be careful of, and that is something that leads to sort of paganism and idolatry and so on and so forth, and that is to conceptualize the spark of divinity within an inanimate object as being separated from God in some way or another. In other words, to worship that rock as being some kind of deity, whereas the truth is that the spark of godliness therein is only because it's part of the divine mind, so to speak. It's part of the plan. It's part of, if it wasn't part of that greater thing, then in fact it wouldn't be there. So there's a very it could be a very dangerous attitude to start paying homage, in a sense, to physical objects of any sort. Even other human beings can also turn into some kind of deity, unfortunately. And certainly pagan kings and kings of the past regarded themselves as divine. In fact, that's the part of the symbolism of the pyramids, was that there's the masses, or the mass of the world, which is the bottom part of the pyramid, the very vast, broad base of the pyramid, represented the vast base of humanity. And when I say base of humanity, I mean that's the way they looked at them, as base, as lowly, as the bottom. The only reason that you're there is to provide support for me. Who was the me? The me was the king, who was the very, very top, the very tip of the pyramid. If you have a look actually on a dollar, I think it's on a dollar bill if I'm not mistaken. Let me just see if I can find a dollar here. I have a dollar in my wallet. But if you have a look at the back of a dollar, you'll see there's a pyramid with an eye at the top, right? A pyramid with an eye at the top. Now, I don't know what the symbolism of that is, but certainly the Egyptian symbolism of that eye at the top of the pyramid was supposed to be the pharaoh, who was the divine representative upon earth, and that's the way they saw the king, right? That's the way they saw they saw humanity. There's a pinnacle of humanity who's the king, and everybody else is a nothing. It's just a basis for that. Now, in Jewish thought, of course, there has to be respect for the king, but the king was only a king because that was his role, that was his mission in terms of what God wanted him to do, and therefore, if he was an evil king, he should be removed. And there were, unfortunately, evil kings in Jewish history too, and a lot of them had sticky ends. So one has to therefore be very careful of the idea of worshiping something as being separated from all the rest of the divine mind. Yes, they might have a more important part in it. There might be there might be a king or a ruler of some sort, or someone as an influencer over many other people. But that's only in terms of a mission that they have. It's not in terms of that they're now a separate being that has some kind of special divinity in it. Okay, let me just go back to some questions over here. Let's see. Oh, this is going to be a long. Nothing is separate from Hashem. That's exactly right. Yeah. Okay, let me just see. Please make the connection to illness. Someone's predictable all of a sudden is struck down with a major illness, causing a complete change in lifestyle, etc. Now, okay. Now, in any particular case, I'm just going to speak generally because particular cases have to be discussed particularly, and not always do we know why some people get sick and some people don't, or some people suffer and some people don't. Suffering is one of those things that we just don't necessarily understand, but in a general sense, The Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, explains the whole concept of Gilgul. Gilgul means reincarnation. Reincarnation is explained in Kabbalah as being the rectification of a previous existence, the rectification of a previous life. A person would not be alive in this world as a Gilgul, and most of us are Gilgulim. We are reincarnated beings. We're not new souls. There's very rarely a new soul that comes down to earth. I think I explained in one of the previous classes that the Alter Rebbe, the other person whose birthday is on the 18th of Elul on Monday, this coming Monday, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, was said by his teacher to be a completely new soul. There's two types of new souls. There's those souls that are completely new, that weren't even part of Adam originally. Adam was the original configuration which contained the vast majority of souls. There were some souls that transcended Adam, and those are called new souls. And then there are souls that are new in the sense that they have not been reincarnated since the time of Adam. But any reincarnated soul, and that's the vast majority of souls today, 99.999% or whatever, of souls are reincarnated in order to rectify a previous situation. So very often, when a person encounters an illness, that illness is some kind of rectification for a previous situation. Now, the illness is not necessarily because of something that the person did wrong, but it could be that the purpose of the illness is to goad the person, or goad is not the right word, prompt the person to overcome the barrier of illness in such a way that he or she comes out of it the other end a much stronger and much more aware, a much more conscious person, a person perhaps who's much closer to God than they were before. That could be an example of what the purpose is. So again, that a person is stricken with an illness is for sure there's a purpose to it. The purpose could be, we don't like to look at it like this, but the purpose could be, in extreme cases, a punishment. But generally, the illness is a tikkun. It's a rectification. It's a means of rectifying a past situation, or it's a means of getting the person to jump over the barrier. You have to, in order to jump over a wall, you have to take a few steps back. And then you get you get a run at it, and you're able to jump over the wall, so to speak. Okay. Nothing separate from God. That is absolutely right. Ben, if you don't mind, I'm going to read that story afterwards. And let me just see if I can. I'm going to copy that, put it in a file. 1 second here, and I'll read it, and then maybe I'll comment on it next week. All right. Let's see. Didn't copy well. Okay, never mind. Illuminati. Oh, that's the Illuminati. Is the picture of the eye on top of the pyramid? Yeah, the people who regard themselves as enlightened and like the like the elite, the Illuminati, the elite. Today, the Illuminati is like the university professors and various other. They sort of call themselves the Illuminati, and they don't call themselves, but they regard themselves that way. Okay. Does the opening and advancement of our consciousness with our Creator, could result in a reward or an award? And does it depend on the level of engagement in the mission, in the work? Yes. What is the difference in terms of reward and award of the yoke in this mission? I'm not sure that I understand the last part of the question, but let's put it this way. When there is the veikut, in other words, when a person cleaves, when his soul cleaves to his Creator, his or her, obviously, we're not making distinctions along the lines of gender and so on. the more a person cleaves, the more the divine mind flows through them, and they understand. The more they understand, the more consciousness they are able to grasp, to contain, so to speak. If that answers it, I'm not sure. Occultism we have to be careful of, because occultism is also magic and occultism and Wicca and black magic and witches and all that kind of thing attempt to manipulate the forces of creation, not for the benefit of creation, but for their own benefit. And that is a pretty dangerous practice. Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure if I answered all the questions here. Are there any more questions, or did I miss one? It's not it doesn't always go dark. No, it doesn't always go dark. Things can go dark, yes. When the intentions are wrong, then things do go dark. And there's a song that is composed by Breslov Hasidim. Breslov Hasidim are the followers of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, a grandson or great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. And he said the song, the words of the song are, this world is a very narrow bridge, Gesher Tzar Ma'od. But he goes on to say that since you're holding my hand, since God is basically holding his hand and guiding him, he's not afraid. He's not afraid to walk on a narrow bridge, but it is a narrow bridge. And of course, one can step off the narrow bridge into all kinds of swampy behavior. But to keep to the straight and narrow is a challenge to a certain extent, but it can be done. The occult is like anything else, good use and bad use. It just means hidden, follow the fractals. I'm not sure what you mean by the fractals in this case, but yes, I would avoid using the word occult. I avoid using the word occult. I'm not saying that you have to necessarily, but the occult is the last part of the word tells you more or less where it's going. Cult, it's not. Bilam practiced occultism. Yeah, it's like you can get some people with very deep knowledge of things, but the question is where that knowledge is coming from. Is it coming from a holy source, or is it coming from an unholy source? If it's coming from an unholy source, eventually it'll bite the person in his rear end, his or her. In other words, the forces of evil only allow a person to use them for their purposes. And it could be that their purposes and his purposes, her purposes coincide for a while, but sooner or later, the forces of evil come and bite the person in the rear end, and a lot worse. I mean, they compare it to the French Revolution. The French Revolution was all about equality and fraternity and so on and so forth, liberty, equality, fraternity, but because it didn't have divinity in it anywhere, it ended up in the guillotine, basically, for everybody. If you think you can destroy it, then you can fix it. Yes. If you think you can destroy it, then you for sure could fix it. That's one of the sayings of Rabbi Nachman as well. Yeah. Hopping tonight. Great. We'll take the time with each question, Rabbi. Okay. Boomerang. Sound familiar? Yeah. Okay. So that's basically more or less what I wanted to point out. If there are any other questions, feel free to ask. If there are no other questions, just if anyone wants to have me mention their name or a prayer for them for some particular situation at the graveside of the Rebbe and the previous Rebbe, please let me know, and I will. Again, the email is kabbalahdecoded@gmail.com. I'll write it in the chat. The sooner you send it, the better, because that way I can print it out and have it with me and so on. Okay. All right, that's all, folks. We'll end it here, and hopefully, okay. So, if you need a request for any particular person, please send in if person has a Hebrew name, the Hebrew name and the mother's name, and that'll make it a lot easier. If there's no Hebrew names, and then just the name of the person. Okay. All the best, folks, and I will see you hopefully again next week. Laila Tov. I think I still do Yael, but it won't harm to send it in again just in case, if you don't mind. I think I still have it, but anyway. Okay. All the best.